Egypt no longer slept. It only listened. It listened to the groaning of brickmakers whose backs were striped with whip marks. It listened to the cry of infants pressed too tightly to desperate chests. It listened to the whispers of a people who had learned that hope was a dangerous thing to say out loud. The Hebrews had multiplied. That was the problem. They multiplied like a river in flood season, overflowing boundaries, defying containment, blessing the land even as the land resented them for it. Where once they had been welcomed guests, now they were spoken of as a swelling shadow. Where once their children had played freely beneath the sun, now every pregnancy was watched with suspicion. And in the heart of Egypt, upon a throne raised high above human mercy, sat Pharaoh. He was young when the fear first entered him. Not fear of gods, he believed himself to be one. Not fear of armies, he commanded the strongest the world had seen. But fear of a promise, a rumor, a people who refused to disappear. Look at them, his counselors had said, voices smooth as polished stone. They are more and mightier than we. If war breaks out, they may join our enemies. And Pharaoh, whose power rested on control, discovered a truth that made his blood run cold. You cannot control what God has decided to increase. So he hardened his heart, and when the whips were not enough, he turned to the midwives. Shiphrah knew the sound of labor before the scream ever came. She could hear it in a woman's breath, see it in the way fingers clenched cloth, feel it in the tightening of the room itself. She had been delivering children since she herself was barely more than one. Puah was younger, quicker in step, sharper of tongue, but her hands were steady, always steady. Between them, they had welcomed more lives into the world than they could count. They had caught first breaths. They had cut cords slick with blood. They had whispered prayers into newborn ears before the world could teach them fear. Midwives lived between worlds, between pain and relief, between death and life, between heaven's decision and earth's reception. And one morning, as the sun rose red over the Nile, a summons came. Pharaoh calls for you. The words carried no warmth, only command. Shiphrah felt it then, the tightening in her chest that had nothing to do with age. Puah saw it, too. Neither spoke as they followed the guards through marble halls where their sandals sounded too loud, too human. Pharaoh did not rise when they entered. He did not need to. His presence filled the room like a weight pressing down on the lungs. When you serve as midwives to the Hebrew women, he said at last, his voice calm, measured, terrifying in its restraint, and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live. Silence fell, the kind of silence that waits for a soul's answer. Shiphrah bowed. Puah bowed, but something else rose within them. Fear of God? They did not argue. They did not protest. They walked out alive. That alone was mercy. Only when the palace walls were far behind them did Puah whisper, "We cannot do this." Shiprah's jaw tightened. "We will not do this." To disobey Pharaoh was death. To obey him was something worse, because they knew a truth Pharaoh did not. Every child comes with heaven's permission, and no thrown-out tranks the womb where God is working. The nights grew heavier. Women labored in secret. Doors were barred. Lamps were dimmed. Every cry of childbirth sounded like a battle cry, and Shiphrah and Puah moved like shadows entering homes, delivering sons, pressing them into their mother's arms, whispering, "Live." Sometimes soldiers came too close. Sometimes the crying would not stop. Sometimes Puah would hold a newborn so tightly her arms shook. As footsteps passed outside, they learned how to lie with wisdom, how to move faster than suspicion, how to trust God with seconds, and the boys lived. Pharaoh noticed. The numbers did not fall. The Hebrews only increased. He summoned the midwives again. "Why have you done this?" he demanded. "Why have you let the male children live?" Shiphrah did not tremble. Puah did not stammer. "The Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women," they said. "They are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes." It was true, and it was not. But God stood behind their words, and Pharaoh could not argue with results he did not understand. God dealt well with the midwives, but heaven never does anything simply. God gave them households, legacy, names that would outlive Pharaoh, because tyrants are remembered for a season, but those who fear God are remembered forever. Years later, a Levite woman would hide her son for 3 months. Years later, a basket would float. Years later, Egypt would tremble. But none of it would have happened if 2 women had not first chosen obedience over survival. But long before Moses ever cried, 2 women had already said no to a king. They had chosen God. They had chosen life. And the deliverance of a nation began not with a staff, not with plagues, not with parted seas, but with 2 midwives who feared God more than a throne. Listener, hear this. Before God ever shakes a nation, he tests a conscience. Before deliverance becomes public, obedience is private. And when history looks for heroes, it often finds women whose names were nearly lost until God spoke them again. Shiphrah, Puah, midwives, deliverers, world changers. If you are listening to this story now, know this: God still uses quiet obedience to overthrow loud evil. God still hides deliverers in ordinary hands. And when systems demand that you destroy what God is birthing, may you have the courage of Shiphrah. May you have the boldness of Puah. And may your obedience echo into generations you may never meet.